All right. Thanks for joining us. We're going to go ahead and officially start now. And thank everyone on Zoom and in the audience. I see a couple familiar faces. So today we have our STEM PhD Pathways panel. The focus on this one is going to be career paths in technology and engineering. And really the whole point is to just expose grad students and postdocs at Yale to alternative career pathways outside of academia. So this month's focus is on tech and engineering. Today we're joined by Daniel Winograd Court. Please correct me if I say your last name wrong.
You got it.
Awesome. He's the co-founder and CTO of Nectary Incorporated, which is a nascent startup for business workflow optimization. Daniel has 7+ years industry experience as a software developer, as well as a PhD in computer science, and he did 2 years as a postdoc also. We also have Emma Ideal, who is an analytics leader at Netflix, focused on using data to enable Netflix Studio to produce and launch amazing content that delights its members. Before joining Netflix, and almost 4 years ago, she was a data scientist at Facebook for 3 years. Emma has a PhD in physics from Yale in 2015, where she focused on the Higgs search. And I'm gonna let Toby say a few words about some upcoming events we have, and then we'll dive in and I'll allow Emma and Dan to give their bio in their words, which will be, a little more in depth and accurate.
Yeah. So we also just want to encourage you guys to take advantage of resources in the OCS. There's so many resources available for everyone at different levels. But some of our upcoming events I want you guys to be on the lookout for in our newsletter we have a job track. There's like a job track series coming up in November. There's like 3 different job tracks. I think it should be in early November to late November. And then there's another panel discussion or a keynote speaker session coming up in October. And the theme for that will be biotech and pharma. So it will be things around biotech and pharma. And I believe that many of us are going to enjoy some of the information from that. And then there will be video interviews also touching on so many different specializations, technology, biotech and pharma, lots of other fields actually. So be on the lookout for video interviews as well, job tracks, video interviews, panel discussions, keynote speaker sessions, and you're going to get information regularly in our weekly newsletter. So I know you guys get lots of newsletters, but be on the lookout and please read and then register on time, because it's usually on the first come first serve basis, just so you don't miss out on some of them. So back to Emma and Dan.
Yeah. So I guess with that said, I'll let you two dive in and give some intros on yourselves, a few words on your path and background, however in depth you want to go. I'll let you take the reins. So whoever wants to jump in first, go for it.
I'll start. Okay, cool. Thanks, Dan. So hi, everyone. My name is Emma Ideal. I got my PhD from Yale back in 2015. So that's an incredible 8 years ago. It's both passed quickly and slowly in a lot of ways. So I studied physics. I was working on the Higgs boson search at the time, which was the very exciting thing to study in experimental particle physics at the time. I decided, going through PhD, I was very bullish on an academic pathway on being a professor ultimately. But I think towards the end of PhD, I decided that maybe wasn't the right path for me when I thought very tactically about what that meant and what that would look like. A lot of folks at the time in physics were jumping ship to data science, to the technology industry, which was very much had a lot of excitement at the time. It was very much growing in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I pursued a 3-month postdoc with Insight Data Science, which is a program that was meant to be to bridge the gap between PhDs into the industry, into data science roles. And so that was very much a hyper growth kind of learning of like how to take what I learned in PhD and apply it very quickly to land a role in data science, which was pretty competitive at the time. It was challenging to get a role by yourself, kind of just going on your own and trying to interview. And so I started at Facebook after that program. So this is back in 2016. I spent about 3 years, I believe, at Facebook as a research scientist, data scientist there. And then after kind of growing my career as a junior data scientist, figuring out how industry works, getting my feet wet, learning a lot on kind of how things were different, but also similar to academia and really growing at Facebook, I decided I was ready for a bit more autonomy, a bit more freedom and flexibility, and kind of growing my career as a data scientist. And Netflix really affords that opportunity. We feel very strongly as part of our culture that there's you are expected to be an autonomous leader, to kind of own large domain areas. And so I felt that was kind of the next jump in my career to being a more senior data scientist. So I joined the company back in December 2019. So I've almost been there for 4 years now. After about 2.5 years of being an individual contributor, so just a data scientist and kind of a technical data scientist, I wanted to pursue the management path. And so I became a people manager about 1.5 years ago now, and now have a team of 7. We focus on running Netflix Studio. So we're not kind of the data scientists thinking about optimizing performance of the Netflix product, but we think about the studio who's responsible for building all of the amazing original series and original films that Netflix puts on service, and thinking about how we run that business efficiently so that we can produce the most amazing content ever, launch the most amazing content ever on service, on time, and so forth, to delight our members. That's my background. Over to you, Dan.
Awesome. Wow, that's cool. I definitely watch some Netflix, and I appreciate appreciate your work.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Dan Wintergard Court. So right now, I guess technically I'm a CTO, co-founder of a company. That company is really small. We have like 3 people. We're trying to grow, but I'll back it up and start a little earlier. So when I finished my undergrad, I did an undergrad in computer science, and I was like, ooh, yeah, I'll be a programmer, and spent a year in industry and had just a really bad time. And I was like, oh, industry is not for me. This is not very enjoyable. It's not very interesting. I should find something else. And so I applied for a PhD in artificial intelligence. Thought that would be really cool. Got into Yale, got here. It was not what I wanted. It was not really cool. Fortunately, I took a semester course with another professor, this guy who did stuff in programming language theory and programming language design. And finally, that was when I figured out, like, I guess, where my life was going. You know, finally something clicked. So I switched into his group, did the PhD. In 2015, I was like, oh yeah, I want to be a professor. This is great. I applied to like 25 different universities, didn't hear back from any of them. And, you know, realized I had made a kind of cardinal mistake. My advisor was old, and he kept telling me things like, oh yeah, you're going to do great. You're smart. You get any position you want, it'll be fine. And as soon as I started talking to some younger professors, because most of my PhD was solo work with my advisor, they were like, what? Your resume is terrible. You need, 80 more papers with, thousands of other authors. What do you think? You would never get a professor position like this. So I was like, great, I'm going to try really hard. I did a postdoc, spent 2 years in Pennsylvania working on a new project. And I got to the end of it, and my advisor there, whatever professor that I was working with, said, Dan, you're really smart. Your resume is still terrible. You're going to need at least 3 more years as a postdoc before you can, really consider applying for a professor position. Have you thought about industry? And I was like, no, I don't want to go to industry. And he's like, you should. You'd do really well. So the big change for me was that now I kind of knew the type of programming I want to do. I knew the things that excited me, that got me to wake up in the morning. And I reapplied to positions, and I got one at, of all places, Target. Who thought that would be exciting? And yet it was. They had a really cool team doing kind of stuff just up my alley. It was a supply chain optimization group. And I loved it. I spent 3 years. I worked remotely. It was great. And then what you do in industry, you switch jobs. Happens all the time in computer science, at least in programming. And I switched to a smaller company where I could have a little bit more say in how it went, a hardware company called Luminous Computing. I joined when it was about 20 people, grew to over 100. But as with many startups, it didn't quite have what it takes. And when I started seeing the writing on the wall, I once again looked elsewhere, and my network worked for me. And I met up with a professor, someone I'd met lots of times at conferences, who said, I have this really neat idea for a startup, and there's some money in it. What do you think? I could use an engineer to help me build this. I partnered with him and one other guy, and that's where I am now. We just started. It's super exciting. I have no business experience outside of being in industry, but you go where you go.
That's super exciting and really nice introductions about your background. Well, one question I have here is also on your career journey. It's like, what was the decision-making process that led you to pursue some of this the career path? I know you've gone from one company to the other at different point in time. But how has the decision-making evolved, over time in all of these companies that you've been?
Are you asking Oluwatobi from like PhD to jumping into the new field, or are you thinking more so transitions within the industry?
So yeah, the decision making that led you to, like, I know you've talked about why you left PhD, right? But how was the decision making like for you in transitioning from PhD to your current to your job, and then even within changing companies as well?
Yeah, I mean, so the decision for me was, I was very bullish, like throughout PhD. I mean, since I was like in middle school, quite honestly, I knew I wanted to go get a PhD. I was always very ambitious as far as academics was concerned. And so I wanted to go as far as possible. Now, getting toward the end of my PhD was when I started thinking about, what does that really mean? Like, what is that going to look like on the ground, right? Like, put ambition aside on like, I feel like I should just want that. Really think about, what is that job going to look like? And I think some of the things that Dan and I were riffing about before we started on, like, is the money I'm going to make? Unfortunately, that's a real factor. Like, what you're paid, right, is a real life, factor. Is what I'm going to be paid to work really hard worth it, right? And so, like, learning a bit more about my advisor's job and like what the day-to-day looked like, how demanding it was, seeing her raise a family at the same time, that was also a consideration for me. And my husband, who also is also a physics PhD as well. So thinking very practically about what that would look like, I became disenchanted with it over time. That just the idea of grant writing and having to get money to run my research. Teaching was always very interesting to me. So leading, academics was always very exciting to me. However, I do that now, right? Like, there was an opportunity to teach and to grow individuals in the industry as well. And that's very much why I ultimately pursued this people management path. So 5th year, 6th year of PhD, I was kind of starting to think, what are my other options? And again, there were lots of physicists that were considering data science, and very specifically this Insight data science program. And so I learned a bit more there and said, and there were other data science programs as well that I explored, also applied to. And so started thinking about that path. Now, before investing in Insight, I actually said, okay, I graduated, I defended, got my PhD. We moved to the Bay Area, where my husband was a postdoc at Berkeley Lab. And I said, I'm just going to apply. I'm smart. Like, I've got a PhD. I'm going to get a job, right? And so you apply, you send in your resume, right? Your brilliant resume. You send that in. You only learn later that your resume is not good enough, to what Dan was saying, that it's just, it's not good enough. It's not written correctly for the industry. We can talk more about that in a bit. Applied, had a few interviews, failed those miserably, right? Nothing materialized. And I was like, what's wrong? What am I doing wrong? And so ultimately then applied for these postdocs. And that was what serviced me well. And I got a role out of Insight Data Science and started in at Facebook. I think at that point, so Facebook, I spent 3 years there, learned all the things that I didn't know as an academic, right? And how to like work well in industry. I think you're prepared well as an academic to do well in the industry. And there are lots of gaps that you need to address when you transition to industry. We can talk a bit more about what those are. So got my feet wet in data science, as it were. And at Facebook, it's such a large company. There's a lot of guidance there and education and support for you to kind of grow in your data science career initially. After 3 years, I felt like I was hitting a ceiling in terms of the impact I was having, the level of independence I was ascribed to drive my own work, determine what I prioritize, how I work on it, and to just grow my skill set. And so Netflix was always a company I was very interested in. It not only pays very well, which was important to me, again, it's an important factor, but the expectations around people who work at Netflix in data science is that you are a leader. Everyone's a leader, regardless of if you are a people leader and a manager or so forth. You're expected to lead your space. We work in a space that's highly ambiguous. It's not clear what problem to work on at any given time. It's not clear how to solve the problem. The partners and people we work with are very complex. Bringing data scientists into an industry, into the entertainment industry, that's been very traditionally gut intuition, what we produce, how we produce it. It's very pen and paper, traditional Hollywood. How do you insert data science and analytics into that space? It's very complicated to figure out the right way to do that. And so it was very much a new door for me to grow my career, grow my ability to forge strong relationships, have impact and influence, all of that. And so that was what made the decision for me to say, I'm done with Facebook. I've learned enough here. I want to move on to become, to grow my career in a new space. And so I pursued Netflix, built some relationships there, met some right people, and then ultimately had some chats from a LinkedIn chat. Like I met a manager, we had a chat, and then I went through the interview process and kind of got the role there about almost 4 years ago now. Hope that's helpful. Dan, curious to hear about your path, your decision making.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of the things you said seem very similar to what I would say. I rather than really saying it all again, I just want to highlight a few things that you said, which was, follow what excites you, right? As you said, you are looking for what is exciting, and you found at Facebook it started to become stagnant, and so you wanted to move on. That's exactly what I felt in a lot of places. Going back to undergrad, at every job I've had, I want to keep growing. I don't want it to just be something I do. I want it to be something that makes me want to wake up in the morning and keep working. I think that chasing that is a great thing to chase, and there are a lot of ways to do it. It's it could have been a job at Netflix for you, could have been somewhere else that would have been amazing. I would never have thought, you asked me at any point in my life before I worked at Target, that Target would be an exciting job. But it turns out it was a really cool group, and I had a great time and met a lot of neat people. That's the second thing I want to highlight was meeting people is incredibly important. I did an internship during my PhD at Microsoft. I went to conferences. I met companies that came to those conferences too. And when I was a grad student, I sort of kind of ignored them. I was like, whatever, I don't even think about what this company says. I'm working on my PhD. Maybe I'll think about it later. But as soon as I decided, hey, maybe industry is good, I had a lot of people I could contact, individuals I met at these conferences, the people I worked with at Microsoft, and suddenly doors started opening. The job that I got after Target, I got because of a contact at Target, and the job I have now is because of contacts I made during my academic time. It just really opens up a lot of doors. And I guess I'll just conclude by saying, I had no idea how much more money you make in industry. The money is real. It's not why I do it. I had a good friend who used to make fun of me that he would call up the company I was working at and tell them that they could stop paying me and I'd still work there. And I try to make that true everywhere I go. God knows, working at a startup, I am not making very much money right now. Hopefully that'll turn around at some point, but the money helps, and it's pretty good.
Awesome. So you guys have spoken a lot about some of the positives of transitioning from academia to your current career path. Let's hear about some of the negatives. So what are some common pitfalls to be aware of that you've observed from either your own mistakes or your colleagues' mistakes? And how would you recommend that some of the people listening in avoid those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wouldn't call them negatives so much as just to say that there are things you need to learn in order to make the transition. And there are, like you say, common pitfalls. I think when pursuing a career in the industry, I'd say a few things. There's a tendency as an academic, and we see this, when we interview folks for jobs in the industry, that there's a tendency to reach for top shelf solutions, meaning prioritizing complexity over simplicity. choosing the neural network over the linear regression. And I think as academics, we learn the complexity. We work on very hard problems, and we need oftentimes hard solutions, complex solutions, right? In the industry, that is not so much the case. That you will favor simplicity, or you ought to favor simplicity over complexity for a variety of reasons. One of which being that your job as a data scientist is that you are delivering solutions to the business to inform decision making or to make a workflow easier, right, in some way. And so complexity makes people confused. They don't know how to use the thing. They don't know how to interpret the number that you're showing them, whatever that might mean. And so there tends to be a behavior in choosing complexity to show how smart you are, right? But really what that's showing is that you are not understanding how the business works. So be mindful of that, of like thinking through where you truly need a neural network versus where a linear regression is going to suit you just fine. Related to that is what we call the 80-20 trade-off, which is the 20% solution you can build gets you 80% of the way to the outcome you care about. So in industry, there are lots of problems that you can be working on, lots of problems to solve. And oftentimes you don't need to dig and dig and dig to get the answer, to get like what you need, what the business needs. You can put in 20% effort, get 80% of the way to that perfect solution, and that is perfect. And you should stop there and have that judgment to know when to stop and move on. Your time as a data scientist is very valuable. You have a lot to offer to the business. Be mindful of where to say no to something, where to say something is good enough, and to move on and spend your time where there's more impact to be had. So that was another thing I kind of had to learn the hard way, right? Again, you reach for the most complex solution, work so hard in it, like heads down. And so I learned that the hard way, that like ultimately I wasted my time. The other thing I'll say before I'll pass it off to Dan is working solo. As an academic, we work solo. In a way to say that you got, your research to own, you've got your dissertation to write, you're spending a lot of heads down time, focus on the hard problems. In the industry, by contrast, quite literally nothing is a solo job. And what makes you a rock star in the industry is your ability, to what Dan was saying, to forge strong relationships, network, influence others, influence your team and your stakeholders. For context, stakeholders, I didn't know what that word meant when I was an academic, so just for clarity for the group here, a stakeholder is someone who is invested in what you are working on. So meaning, again, as a data scientist, you are in some ways serving the business. The business is your stakeholder, so whoever that might be. Could be an engineer, it could be like a business operations focused person, it could be the CEO or the CTO, perhaps, depending on the nature of the work you're doing. The stakeholder is someone who's going to leverage your data analytics, your model, your machine learning model, your metric, whatever you're building, and take action on it. So your ability to influence those stakeholders is really what success looks like in the industry. So being able to grow from an academic who tends to work solo to really being able to think about how to influence and work with a variety of other people. Is something that I also had to learn how to do well. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah. Building on that, the idea of a stakeholder, in the programmers world, we have a very similar idea, right? You're writing programs and someone's going to use them. And when I wrote code, theorems for papers, I kind of, hoped maybe someone would use them, but like also knew in the back of my head, no one was ever going to like run this code I was writing for a paper. It was all about the ideas. And that does change, where I would spend time at the end putting together a paper to try and make it appeal to some audience. In industry, I'm spending much more time throughout the process talking with the person who's going to use the program, the customer, the stakeholder, whoever it is, to make sure they're getting what they want. And yeah, it's not quite as solo a process. And adding to that, I feel like I need to bring up work-life balance here and say that academia actually has terrible work-life balance. You get the sense that you have to work all the time, that it is your life. And this might be weird, it's very easy to bring that over into industry, and it can feel good. It can feel good to work a lot and get a lot of props for that, to get promoted, but it can also very much lead to burnout. And I have found that good jobs that I've had and good jobs, the good managers recognize that. And I've had managers tell me, dude, you need to take a vacation. Like, why aren't you using your vacation days? Really, you don't need to be here all the time. The company will run without you. And as much as you want to be pivotal, it is important to recognize that you have a part to play, and part of that is making sure, for the company and for yourself, that you can continue to work tomorrow because you're taking care of yourself today. I don't feel like I ever got that in academia. No one was telling me like, take care of yourself and make sure that you don't burn out. They were just saying, write more papers. So kind of a weird reverse pitfall kind of thing, where industry is good in that way. The last actually really interesting pitfall that I think of is about one's own personal values. When you are in academia, you will do research, for humanity, for science, for, the betterment of mankind. And sure, it might be your advisor's research, or it might be your idea, but you're doing it because you think it's going to be good for the world. When you go into industry, every company, well, I guess you could join some that aren't, but every company is like a capitalist entity that wants to make money and wants to extract labor out of people and, make whatever they can. And it's really easy to get into a trap where you work for a company that maybe isn't like that good for the world, but you're like, oh, my job is pretty good, and I'm just doing this research. And I feel like it's important, like that can come back and haunt you when you see, what has happened that maybe you're not so excited about what you've supported in the past. And I don't think that's something in academia you ever have to worry about, but it is something to think about in industry. You may not want to apply, you may want to apply to every university for a professorship, but you may want to think a little more critically about what companies you apply for, to make sure you're doing work that you're still proud of in the broadest sense, in addition to, the day-to-day work that you're doing.
That really aligns with your values, right? I definitely
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that you can, to your point earlier, like can wake up and say, like, I'm excited to go work for this company. Like it's a mission I can back. That was very much a move for me. Like I was thinking about Netflix, right? I love our mission. It's fun, like entertain the world. I mean, how great is that? I mean, so yeah, and working in a technical, but like very much a creative space and like supporting creative partners. And yeah, it's such a fun job. It's such, fun problems to work on. So +1 to that. I would say on your piece, Dan, that you're mentioning around work-life balance, for sure. I would say that it's definitely better than academia. I would say it's still something I'm working on, right? It's like the work is demanding. There's a lot that you can work and because it's technology and all you need is your computer, you could be on all the time.
Yeah.
So being very mindful about, again, what I was saying earlier with prioritizing, thinking about where does the impact lie? What are the problems I need to work on? Because I can work on everything and anything and really drill down. So being mindful of what you say yes to, what you say no to, and then also just trying to be as efficient as you can on the problems, like work with others, get the input that you need to do your job more efficiently and work through that. And that's still things I'm working on. Like, where can I be faster? Where can I be more efficient or increase my throughput in some way? Because it is easy to be on all the time.
Yeah, I think especially people like us, like Yale grad students. I also, like you, knew to some extent in middle school that I wanted to get a PhD. That kind of drive can lead to overwork.
Absolutely.
And yeah, choosing your battles, recognizing, learning to unplug, really, really good. One of the things that worked for me, once I started in industry, the companies would send me a work computer, a second laptop next to my personal one that was for work. And, when I open that one, I'm working. And when I close it, I'm not working. And, if I want to just, surf Reddit or do something else, I know that like, I'm okay with that. I put in my hours and now I can do this. And yeah, that's something I never felt in academia. Every time I was on vacation, every time I was doing something else, I would think, oh, I should really be reading that paper, or I should really be working on this, program or proof or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I'd add that it's making me think is like, in choosing a company that aligns to your values, also be very mindful when you're interviewing and things to think about who's your manager going to be? How do they run the team? Like, what do they prioritize? And making sure, to your point, that you've got managers that care for your well-being, and figure out, like, you can ask questions like, how have you dealt in the past with burnout, or when an individual has come to you who's working really hard and kind of exhausted, like what would you say to them? Questions like that to kind of like get tidbits. So like, what kind of leader would you be working for? And making sure that because there's going to be a mix. In industry, you'll find that there are some leaders who truly care about their people, are mindful of it, are empathetic, and who find solutions to handle things like burnout. There are others who maybe care less or more. So definitely look for that as you're interviewing. Ask those questions.
Yeah. When you're interviewing, there are all kinds of questions you can ask. One question that I always ask when I interview is to the person who's interviewing me, like, why are you still working here? What do you like about this company? I want to see, whether they can talk up how great the company is. Honestly, one place I interviewed, the person said to me, it's not a bad company. I wouldn't say it's like evil. That seems good enough for me. And I was like, I don't think I want to work here.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions you can ask, and you probably should when you're interviewing, to figure out if it's a good fit, if it works for you.
Have questions. One piece of advice: have questions. Okay, like when you get to interviews, inevitably the interviewer will ask you in every single round of interviews, any questions? You have any questions for me? Have questions. Have a long list of questions. You should never get to the point where you're sort of done, except to say, like, hey, we've run out of time. I see. Thank you for answering all the questions that I've asked you. I have more, but we can hold those for later, for instance. But you should always have questions. Yeah. Sorry, Adrian Oluwatobi, I know we're
cool. I mean, I wanted to ask about how similar your day-to-day job is with academic culture and all, but I feel like you've touched on that. So I'm just gonna move on. You might go back to touch on that, but I'm just gonna move on to asking you to provide us with a broad overview of the diversity of career paths in your field. Well, you can also touch on the previous question, Elio.
Dan, do you want to start?
Sure.
If you're passing the field, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll make one quick comment about day-to-day life, and say one thing that was really great about doing a PhD, I didn't realize I would learn this, was learning how long I like to work before having a meeting. Because I have seen groups where they, have a daily stand-up, or maybe even like twice daily, or people are chatting with each other all the time on Slack. And honestly, that's too much for me. I would love if my boss, or when I have a boss at times, says, like, here's a project to work on. Let's talk about this once or twice a week. My advisor, for what it's worth, back in my PhD, we talked once a month, and that wasn't enough. I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't enough. But I've also learned since then that every day is too much. It's overly stressful. So figuring that out about yourself, and yet another question you can ask in an interview, finding what a good cadence for meetings is and working with other people is really useful to finding a good fit in your job. About careers in general.
Dan, can I add something to the point?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would say day to day, one of the things that's very important, again, going back to what you just said and to what I said earlier with working solo, what is very important is, I think as an academic, you can tend to say, here's my problem, I'm going to go heads down and work, right? And then meet with my advisor once a month and see how we're doing and get some feedback. That will not get you very far in the industry, meaning you should, earlier on, you should be so embedded with your stakeholders to where you can identify problems. You can identify, this is something we should solve for the business, whatever that might mean. Then very tactically, it's scoping the work that you want to do, the analytical work that you want to do with that partner, like hand in hand in lockstep, scoping the work as you execute, like checking in throughout technical execution to make sure you're headed in the right direction. You're building the thing that's going to be useful, pivoting where necessary, because ultimately that's going to give you a much better shot at landing the impact, right, that you want to have with that. What I did in the past, and what I've seen data scientists do in the past, is they will take the problem, they'll go work really hard in it, and then surprise their stakeholders or surprise their partners with their deliverable and say, look at what I did. and it's inevitably, you're probably gonna have to go back and rework stuff. And then now you've wasted time. So learn to take your partners and stakeholders along for the journey, make sure that they're bought into what you're doing. And so a lot of the day-to-day work is making sure you constantly have that alignment. Share your insights, see how you want to pivot the work if necessary, and so forth. Really work closely versus surprising.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
Now,
As far as career paths, so most of my industry time has been in software development, and well, in a lot of industry, the way it kind of works is you join as some sort of individual contributor, IC is what we call them, and you do some work for a while, and eventually you kind of get promoted into management. This is not always good. Some people want to be managers, and that's awesome. Some people don't, and they feel that they need to keep doing that to accelerate their career, to go higher. Fortunately, there are some companies in the programming world, like Google is kind of a top example, where you can stay as an individual contributor and you can just keep programming throughout your career, and you'll keep getting raises. There's surely some sort of salary cap, but it's like quite high. You'll be pretty happy. So, I can't speak to every to other fields, but I do know in the broad realm of computer programming and software development, you can look to be a manager. You can rise up in the kind of business ranks, but you can also make a really good career out of just writing good code throughout your life. Finding projects you're excited about working on, and then writing the code, making them happen, and moving on to the next one.
Same. So yeah, everything you said, Dan, like +1 to all that. I would say be mindful on like if management is truly the right path for you, if you feel passionate about it, and like have rationale for that. I think there is a lot of pressure to say, I want to keep growing. Like inevitably when you start your career, you want to just grow and grow and grow. But that could mean growing as a tech lead, or growing in the IC ranks, in the individual contributor ranks, owning bigger projects, owning bigger spaces, influencing broader sets of stakeholders. You can grow in that way. And maybe that's what you love, if you love heads down sort of technical work, and so forth. And then people management is a very different path, right? Like being a people leader is totally different. The considerations are different. The nature of the work and the day-to-day is different. It's a lot of talking. It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of like influence skills, right? And communication skills and writing skills. So it's a very different role. So as you proceed in your career, and inevitably you'll start as an individual contributor, figure out really what you love, learn where you can, talk with people managers about what their role looks like, and figure out if that's ultimately for you or not. And that's perfectly fine. I think there are a lot of folks who jump into management or try to go that path just because they see it as the only path or the only way for growth to happen. And I feel that's just wrong. And so consider what's really right for you and what you're going to love doing. Is that helpful, Oluwatoji?
Yeah, it's very.
I'm going to jump in with the last question before we go to audience Q&A, because I think this last question is going to build off of what you two just said very nicely. So, when you're in grad school, you could focus on, being like the best programmer ever, or your writing skills or whatever. What were some of the skills you worked on as a grad student that you think has helped you the most in your current role, such as maybe your writing skills, just basic communication, and what's some advice you would give to current grad students to work on developing those skills, thinking about the next step?
I'll start with like communication. So communication is huge. That's a big one. So as an IC or as a manager, managers more so, you will be communicating day in, day out all the time. And so I think to the extent that you can work on that, and there were ways that I found in grad school, I am not going to remember this well, but there were various, I forget what this is called, but there was a thing that I did where I communicated my PhD research to like a non-technical audience. I had found various forums to do such a thing. Very productive, right? Being able to deliver highly technical solutions and results to a non-technical stakeholder and partner audience fundamental skill set to have in the industry. So be able to explain what you're working on in your PhD to your mom or your sister or your brother, and find forums to do that. I would say like there are technical skills from the PhD that are super important. Programming, it's huge. Python, great. SQL is a big one. SQL, if you haven't search for that, that's fundamental for data science and analysis. So some of the technical skills were there. And then I think like just out of physics, out of my PhD, it's just big data, working with big data, breaking down really complex problems into components and solving components of the problem. Very much a skill set as an IC, a data scientist that you do. But I would say communication is the biggest one that I think find places to work on that, because the stronger your communication skills, the better you'll come off in interviews, the more effective you'll be in the industry, just generally. Yeah. Dan, what would you say?
Communication is great. I'm gonna go in a slightly different direction and also point out grad school is really hard. Research is hard. Working on a problem that you don't know if it's going to work. If you don't know whether there's going to be an answer, let alone whether you can find that answer, that is a skill in itself. And that is something I think is not quite unique, but kind of special about what you can learn in grad school. The perseverance and tenacity of working on a really hard problem. Not every problem in industry is going to be a really hard problem. But I will say, right now, trying to start a company, I feel like a little bit like I'm in grad school again. Like I'm working on something and I don't know if it's going to work, and I have to keep trying very hard, and I don't know what to do all the time, but I know that I should be able to figure this out, and I need to figure it out, and so I'm going to. And that's something I learned how to do in grad school, how to pursue this kind of challenge. Something that I never had to do before that. Some high school project, undergrad project, they're small potatoes in comparison. Something you can whip off in a semester, fine. Something that takes years of dedication, that can help at any level. So that's something you'll kind of get for free, but recognize that that's important. And when you do go into interviews, when if you do go into industry, it's something that not everyone has. And when you surround yourself with Yale grad students, you might think that everyone has that, but it is a special skill. Yeah, I guess in a slightly different direction, I'll say internships are really great. Tying back around something you can do in grad school, get an internship. It can give you a sense of what industry is like. This question of like, oh, what's your day-to-day like? You learn that by doing internships. You can see the difference between in computer science, like a programming job versus an industry research job. And the connections you get will be great. Doing an internship, you need to be able to learn quickly what the new problems are, communicate them, make a good impression by the end. And if you do all those, first of all, if you do a terrible job, no problem. One company, you can just go find another one later. No one's going to write you a bad review later. And if you do a great job, that's a wonderful connection that you have. 1, 2, 3, however many years later, you can call those people back up and say, hey, do you have an opening? Or, oh my God, 3 people that I worked with, you're now at 3 different companies. I now have connections to 3 different places where maybe I can get a job. So I don't know, internships are awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool insights. And I think that we want to give the audience, some time to ask some questions. I want to tell people on Zoom that you can send in your question, and then I'm going to take it. We're going to also try to alternate between Zoom and then people in person, because of course we have to acknowledge their presence too. And some questions have been submitted to us, and then we've asked some of them. We'll try to touch on if we have some time. But there's also pizza, but please eat pizza and then get yourself a cup of drink, soda. All right. So if you have questions in the house, can you please just? Okay. I'll go first. Your name and then your question.
Hi, my name is Bezat. Thank you so much for your talk. I kind of have 2 questions, maybe kind of similar, but have very different perspectives. One is how much is common to write a paper, kind of what we write, academic paper, but in industry, how much would you able to decide what one thing is good for the public, or, you know, if you want to like write a paper as we do in academic? And then the other question, also kind of similar, but how much do you read papers, like academic papers? For example, for Dan, who is doing a startup, like, is reading papers help or something like that? But I don't know.
Okay, did you get a question? I mean, I know it's. Yeah.
So the first question was about whether we write papers in the industry or.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So when I started in industry, I joined a group that was kind of research adjacent. I actually thought I was going to be more in the research side, and I wasn't. And I made a big deal. I said, I really want to be able to write papers here. I want to be able to publish. I never actually did that. Writing a paper is a lot of work. As a programmer, what I did end up doing is contributing to open source. And I definitely made that a stipulation in my, it wasn't exactly in my contract, but in my interview process, that I wanted to be able to take some of what I did that wasn't necessarily super business specific, and put it out there for the open source community. Yeah, definitely, I was reading papers while I was programming. As a software developer, there are a couple ways to do it. You know, you can kind of coast along with knowledge and do pretty well. But if you keep up to date with the latest features and trends, I do a particular type of programming, which is functional programming. And it's constantly evolving, and functional programming paradigms are being added to other languages all the time now, which I think is really cool. And keeping up to date with the academic literature, I don't read nearly as many papers as I did when I was a grad student, but I definitely still do it. I love the idea that I could write a paper. It's just the time that goes into actually writing the paper is a lot. And that's time that I could be spending working on something that's more valuable to the company right now. And so I haven't done a lot of that.
There are certain roles, so on my side, there are certain roles like in the data science field where you are more of like an R&D research scientist working at the forefront of technology. A lot of what like Dan is talking about, where writing papers, reading papers is part of the nature of that kind of job. I would say like 90%, 80 to 90% of roles in data science are less so that like really like R&D heavy type of role, and more so one that's like geared toward helping the business make decisions at any given time. And those can be strategic decisions, or they can be more tactical, like business operations type decisions. There, being at the forefront of technology is not so much the focus. The reading and writing that you're going to do is like, I do a ton of reading. My days are filled with reading memos. And Netflix we call it a memo culture. We do a lot of reading and writing. But that will be more so focused on how is the business evolving? Like, what are the problems we're trying to solve for our Netflix consumers and our members? And so reading more so about that, and then writing about, okay, what analytic, like how are we scoping our work? What analytical work, data science work, machine learning work do we want to do to solve business problems and so forth? So less so research that we would publish in a public forum, more so internal reading and writing, if that makes sense. Again, depends on the exact role you have.
Thanks. Are you satisfied with the answer?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
We have one question on Zoom.
Yeah, we got a question from the Zoom. So Kevin Jean wants to know, can you speak more about the importance of getting internships during your PhD? How many internships would you recommend doing? Are they semester long, year long, summer?
I'll start that because I was talking about internships. So I did one internship. It was over the summer. It was really good. I don't know what else I was going to do during that summer. I guess, work on my dissertation or something. Probably not. But it was really valuable. I met a lot of interesting people, and I kind of saw how research and development was done in industry. So my particular internship was at Microsoft Research, and yeah, it was really good. Some people that I had met at conferences, I ended up interning with them. Very valuable. when I was a grad student, I did not think for a second that I was going to be in industry. I thought I was going to be a professor. And so when I got advice to do an internship, I discounted it, as maybe some of you are doing now. It worked out well enough. I'm happy with my life, but I do think doing internships to see what that world is like and to grow your network is really valuable. I've been on the other side of this now. I have worked with interns who've done like semester-long interns, usually kind of a part-time thing. And it looks really valuable for them. On the one hand, they get, I've been kind of in a mentor role to people who have come in to do internships with me, and they've gotten this like hopefully interesting industry experience to figure out what it would be like to work in industry. Internships in tech usually pay, and they pay pretty well. So that's a nice little bump, especially if you're late in grad school and funding starts to be an issue. And yeah, they open a lot of doors.
So I didn't pursue any internships during my PhD because, like Dan, I was very much in the academic track. And also I felt like it was kind of taboo, to be quite honest, in physics, that like the expectation from your advisor and just the general professor ecosystem was that you pursue academia. Industry and data science was not like a well-trodden path at that point back in 2015. It is now, and I know there are like PhDs in data science now, plenty of internships. I would say like one difference, now for data science compared to 2015 is that it's harder to get into the field. There are lots of now experienced data scientists. So the more that you can have now as a fresh PhD on your resume to show that you understand how the industry works, you have real experience, you have real relationships built, the better that you will appear when you are trying to get full-time roles. So consider that earlier, the better. I managed like a summer intern a few years back that I ultimately hired as a full-time employee just after that. So it's a great in to a full-time role at a company if it goes well for you and for the company. So the more the better, quite honestly. And it also gives you a sense of the variety in roles. So the more internships you have, you can kind of explore these more R&D roles, more machine learning focused roles, more experimentation, analytics type roles, more engineering. There's a variety of roles here in the technology industry. So these internships can give you a sense of what really jives or vibes well with you. Yeah, hope that's helpful, Kevin.
Yeah, Emma, at the beginning, I remember you mentioned that the way you wrote a resume for industry had to be quite different from maybe how you would have pitched one to academia. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, about what sort of skills are valued in the sort of interview process, and maybe what advice you would have.
Dan, I'm going to love to hear your perspective here as well. Just some like quick hit things. So
can I add to the question? Yeah, I want to add to the question. There's one more question that looks like that. And the question is that how do you translate research experience into resume job skills? So you could add that to his question.
Sorry, how do you translate like your skills as an academic into something that's valuable for like a data science role, for instance? Is that the question?
Okay, like how do you, I'm just adding to his question. The question is, how do you translate research experience into resume job skills?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll start there and like I'll just ramble some thoughts. So one thing that we will find, like now being on the other side, like the interviewer side, is we'll sometimes get CVs, from academics. Don't do that. So like, do not have 10 pages. It needs to be 1 page. So like, let's start there because this is like very common that we'll see that. So unless again, it is a very research heavy, academically driven role, but in the industry, do not put the papers that you've written, don't put the conferences you've gone to. It's just not applicable anymore. What they want to see is that you have the business know-how. So meaning, what was the impact, to the extent that you can communicate impact of your work? Like what did, figure that out, what that means for your role. I won't give examples there, but the better you can communicate skills that you've grown, like big data analysis skills, certain technical skills, like have you taken a course on Coursera where now you're familiar with how to code in Python and R and SQL, and you understand some machine learning algorithms, like put that in your resume, that you have some, it not only shows that you've grown some skills, but that you've taken the initiative to grow those skills, which is, again, is we want to see that you have that, that sort of grit or interest. So yeah, short, one-page resume, focus on your experience, on your side projects. If you haven't done an internship, do some side projects. Pick a problem where there's a public data set for you to analyze, build a model on, build a metric, do some analysis on, and then do it. And then write, you know, in your resume, this is the analysis I pursued. If I were working for such and such company, this is the business impact I can imagine this analysis